Good evening.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll begin shortly. My clock says 5:57, so about 3 minutes, maybe give her an extra minute or two.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll
Good
begin
afternoon.
in 1 minute. Let's see, where am I? Where am I? Where am I? All right, shall we begin? I'm assuming everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Sir?
So we ended last class. And as usual, I like to sort of recap the very end of the previous class before we kick off the new one. Last class, we said the first half of the semester, really, we're going to concentrate on building our foundational elements, all the ingredients that we're going to need when we actually focus on macroeconomic analysis in the second half of the semester. And one of the key things that we're going to need to have in the back of our minds going forward is what is called the key economic principles. These are the kind of sort of background information that underpins a lot of our discussion as we go forward. Right? The first of these is what we call the principle of opportunity cost, or otherwise known as the next best choice, is what you give up to consume the good or service that you're currently consuming, or what you give up to do the activity that you're currently doing. Right? The principle of opportunity cost, or the next best choice, is not necessarily an alternative choice, right? Or rather, it's not necessarily any alternative choice, is what you most rather have been spending your money on if you didn't have to spend it on the things that you spent it on. Okay. So the principle of opportunity cost is really the sacrifice, what you gave up. The next principle is what we call the marginal principle, and the marginal principle says that, apologies, it's all about marginal benefit and marginal cost. And the marginal principle says that we will increase the level of activity as long as the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost of that activity. And we will reduce the level of activity as long as the marginal cost of continuing that activity exceeds the marginal benefit of continuing that activity. And when we choose the level of activity that we would pursue, or the amount of goods that we would purchase, we will choose the level such that marginal benefit is exactly equal to the marginal cost. Right? So in principle, we will always wring out the absolute last bit of benefit from any activity that we're looking to pursue. So the marginal principle says, as long as marginal benefit exceeds marginal cost, no matter how small, we will continue that activity. As long as the marginal cost exceeds the marginal benefit, no matter how small the difference, we're not going to move forward. Then we have what is called the principle of diminishing returns. The principle of diminishing returns says this: if you're producing a product or a good or service with two or more inputs, and you increase one input while holding the other fixed, at some point, called the point of diminishing returns, output will begin to increase at a decreasing rate. The classic example of this is trying to pull an all-night study session. If you have done this for any reason, I strongly don't recommend it, but if you choose to go down that route, you will realize very quickly that you may get a lot accomplished in the first hours of studying. But as the night wears on, and as you go into the 1, 2, 3, 4 a.m. hours, even though you're still putting in a full hour studying each time, you're getting less and less out of it, because maybe half of that time you're dozing or rubbing sand in your eye and reading the same page over and over again. So you're still putting in an hour each time, but you're getting less and less out of it, out of each hour as you go along. That's the principle of diminishing returns. Then we have the principle of externality, also known as the spillover principle. And this principle says this: for some goods and services that are produced, persons not involved either bear the cost or enjoy the benefit of those activity, even though they had nothing to do with it. All right. 1 second for me, please. Hey, Amber. Thank you. All right. Sorry, that's my dog getting himself into trouble. As you can tell, I'm home because I'm on vacation, at least for the next 2 weeks. So, and then we have what's called the reality principle, or the real versus nominal principle. And it says what matters to people is the real value of money or income rather than its purchasing power. Right? What is more important to us is what we can buy with that money as opposed to the actual face value of that money. And finally, the principle of voluntary exchange. It says that if two participants are voluntarily involved with a transaction, there is no coercion involved. They would only participate in that transaction if they both think they're going to be better off because of that transaction. So the principle of voluntary exchange says that given the rationality assumption, that is, we're looking out for our own best interests, any voluntary exchange between two parties must be under the basis that it makes each of the parties better off. So those are the key principles, and certainly we will look over, they will come up again and again and again as we proceed through the semester. And then we wanted to add a few more definitions. We define what we mean by households and firms in the market. We define factor market, goods market. We define what we mean by a household as an individual or group of individuals who live in the same housing unit. We define a firm as an organization that uses resources to produce a product, which it then sells for money. And we said there are 3 types of firms that we want to concern ourselves with. The first is called a sole proprietorship. This is a company that's owned by a single individual, and that individual is responsible, or what we say liable, legally liable, for all the debts that that company may incur. Then we have what is called a partnership. A partnership, different from a sole proprietorship, a partnership is owned by 2 or more partners or 2 or more individuals, and each of those individuals is fully responsible, or what we call individually liable, for all the firm's debts. The liability of the partnership is not split between the 2 partners. The liability is entirely on each partner individually. So if the partnership were to break up for any reason, the creditors of that firm can look to any one of the partners for their full restitution. And finally, you have what's called a corporation. Legally, a corporation is a legal entity, a person under the law. And a corporation is owned by shareholders, and each shareholder's liability is limited to the value of his or her stock or share of the company. That's why it's called a share, because it limits your liability. What creditor can come after you for only to the value of your stock or your ownership piece of the company. Okay, that's where we ended last class. Before we begin the new class, you have a new homework this week. I will send it out probably tomorrow, but definitely by Wednesday, and it will be due the following Monday. And we said it will cover the production possibilities curve and the key economic principles. And I thought at least for this first homework, we'll walk our way through a sample so you get a feel, a flair for what we're looking for. You get to sort of test out your answers ahead of time and see if in fact you're heading in the right direction or you're thinking in the right direction when it comes to your homework. Remember now, economics are different from some other subjects like mathematics or something like that. Economics is not black and white. Right? It is, you take your foundation elements and you apply logic and economic reason to the foundational elements. And as long as you can justify your answer based on these key economic principles and these foundational elements, there's no reason why you cannot get full marks. Okay, so here's an example of the kind of homework question you're likely to see based on the production possibilities curve. So you get a scenario, and you'd get a series of questions, and you'd get something like a graph, something like this. And you use this graph to help you respond to the questions. Okay, so here's our sample. We have a landlocked African nation of Lesotho, a real country, really landlocked. That's about it in terms of the truthfulness of our statement. A landlocked African nation of Lesotho specializes in the production of just two products. They have safaris for rich tourists, and they produce native tribal arts and crafts that they in turn sell. All right. So they have tourism services, safaris, lions and tigers and bears, and they do arts and crafts. And so, question then to say, for each of the following scenarios, give your understanding of the production possibilities curve, discuss Lesotho's economic situation based on the scenario that you see. Your response must focus on an analysis of the economy's position relative to its PPC. So please don't go on to Google and tell me all about the country of Lesotho. What we're interested in is based on the PPC. All right. So is the country within its PPC, on its PPC, beyond its PPC, based on scenario that's offered to you? Explain your rationale. So it's not just enough for you to say, oh, it's outside its PPC. Why? Explain your rationale for the conclusion and indicate whether or not you think the country is moving towards or away from its production possibilities curve. And finally, is there any further action that you could recommend to the government? If so, please advise. So the only way to approach this is to look at these various scenarios and see if in fact we can relate those to the PPC in a way that makes economic sense. So 4 scenarios. Please feel free to jump in anytime. I strongly encourage it. There's no right or wrong answer here, simply because this is just a sample. What I think might work, if you can explain it better, that works as well. So the first thing we run into, and none of these are connected to each other, so we take them all independently of each other. So despite its best effort and encouragement, there remains a minority of citizens who are unwilling to participate in the economic growth and development of Lesotho. They don't want to act as safari guides. They don't want to work to produce native arts and crafts. Okay. So that's your first scenario. Then you go to your graphs and charts and say, okay, do any of these look like they apply to that scenario? I'll go back to the scenario. Despite its best efforts and encouragement, that is by the government, we have a minority of citizens who are perfectly happy to be bums. They don't want to act as safari guides, so they don't want to get in that part of the industry, and they don't want to do arts and crafts. They want to do nothing. If you were to look at these various productive possibilities curve, which one of those closely approximate what you think is going on in Lesotho?
The first one.
Top left.
Okay, let's start with the first. Who is this? Sorry.
Curry.
Curry. All right. You said the first one. Why?
The reason why is because they know the government knows their maximum potential. However, due to circumstances that they can't force, even though they have the stuff available for the people to do so, simply because they don't want to do it, that puts them behind. Hence the reason why the PPC is actually under.
All right. Any other perspectives?
I concur a little bit with Mr. Curry.
And this, you are Mins?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think he is correct in that, because from what you explained, if you on the PPC, that means you maximize, everybody is working. So that was my key indicator right there. These brothers and sisters don't work, so you can't exceed your PPC. So you more than likely can fall within your original PPC.
Okay.
Oh, no. It's not, oh, now I see it. I see it, Mr. Mr. Mayor. It's not the first one. It's the bottom right where the star is on the inside. I can barely make that up. Okay, sorry.
Okay, so then why do you think it's not the first one?
Because the first one is like, if it's something, that's not symmetrical. Symmetrical
Okay,
is going
let's go
out.
back. Let's go back to scenario second. All right. Despite its best effort, there remain a minority of citizens who are unwilling to participate in the growth and development of Lesotho. All right. Now, did they say these people were working before and quit their jobs?
No, they did not.
No,
So is there any reason to think that they were previously on their PPC?
No.
no, sir.
All right. See, the only way, the first one, the only way the PPC would fall in that case is if they were on their PPC and they decided, okay, I'm not going to work anymore. That would cause the PPC to fall. But if you look at scenario number 4, bottom right, they are already not participating. You follow? No?
Well,
Yes, sir.
well,
So, okay, here, think of it this way. Is there a difference between somebody coming out of high school and never been able to find a job and somebody working and quit?
no, there's no difference because both are still considered unemployed.
Really?
There is a difference.
Oh,
But-
wait, well,
Who can get unemployment benefits?
There is a difference.
oh yeah, that is true.
Those who contributed to NIB. Yeah.
Yeah, that is
Exactly. So there is a difference. And this is what we're faced with here. And this is why this is what it's going to cost you to pull your hair out this entire semester. Because this is going to require you to think your way through these things. The math is not going to be complicated, but whenever you're faced with any problem or question in this class, is going to be, okay, I thought about it, and I better think about it again, and then think about it a third time to make sure before I commit myself to an answer. But in the case of the first scenario, they would have to have been on the PPC. They would have to have been working, be employed in one of those sectors, and then withdraw their services for the PPC to shift inward.
Okay.
However, in the bottom right-hand corner, all we can see is that we are not as fully involved in the production process as we could be. We're not being as efficient as we could be. So
Stagnant.
we're inside the PPC. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yes, it does.
All right, let's see if we can try another one. Okay, second one. A recent killing of a family of tourists on a safari has led to a 50% reduction in tour bookings. Anyone want to jump in?
I would say bottom left,
Top right.
top right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Why top right?
Okay, I would say it's because one area was affected. The arts were not affected, but the tourism, the safaris were affected. So that was the one factor that was affected because of the killings.
Right, and the arrow shows that
It was a
safaris decline. All right, good. All right, what about this one? The African National Development Bank has offered Lesotho, that should be a grant, not a grant, sorry, let me correct it. A grant of US 10 million to purchase equipment and machinery to greatly improve the production of native arts and crafts. So let's go to our scenarios. They get extra money to improve their production of arts and crafts.
Bottom left.
Bottom
No.
left. Now, make up your mind.
Would that be
Hold
Bottom left.
it would be
What
bottom
area?
left.
What area
Because-
was affected?
Okay,
The bottom left, the arts and
Right.
crafts.
the money only went to arts and
Arts
crafts.
and crafts, yeah.
Nothing to do with safari. So we see an increase in arts and crafts, an hour going out, but nothing with the safari.
Okay.
Okay. And lastly, there's a general nationwide strike.
Top right.
Top left.
Top left, sorry. Top left.
Left.
Top left. All right. There's a decline in production in all sectors, right, from whatever it was before. Even if you're saying they weren't already on that PPC, but wherever they were, there's a general decline in production in all sectors because there's a nationwide strike. There's not a strike just in the arts and crafts production. There's not a strike just in safari. There's a strike overall. So we see the PPC shifting in and to the left. All right. So can you do this again when you see your homework?
Probably you'll freak out at first, but I think I'll get it.
We'll try our best.
Okay, so
So
then,
I have a question,
sure.
Mr. Demare. How much would a question like this work? Like,
We have
Like-
14 weeks, so you probably have maybe 8 homeworks.
No,
So this will be 12.5% of your homework grade.
okay, so on an exam, like let's say a midterm, the question like this will work like what?
2
10?
points.
2? Oh, wow.
2.
Okay.
Oh, we haven't even gotten to the fun questions as yet. This is just the warm up.
I just was wondering because this is a lot for just 2 points.
No, this is just warm up.
Mr.
Okay.
Demare,
This is what I'll tell you. Before we get to say your exams, a lot of this will begin being sort of background information in the back of your head. You won't even think much about it.
Okay.
Because these are foundation elements, they're new to you now, but very quickly, when you see how they filter into almost every other thing that we talk about, they're just going to be sort of background noise.
Right. Okay.
All right, any other questions? So this is
yes,
kind
sir.
of, yes,
The course is 7 or 14 weeks.
14
I thought-
weeks. I said 7?
I think I was under the understanding it was 7 weeks, twice a week, 7 weeks, or 14 classes.
We're going to be, your exam is when? So this will answer all the questions.
June 21st, I think.
Okay, so that's 7 weeks then. Yeah, June 21st, that's 7 weeks. So, 14 classes. A normal semester would be 14 weeks, once a week. So it's the same thing. Okay. So that's the kind of questions you would get on the PPC. But you will also have questions on key economic principles. And in this case, you get 5 scenarios. And you said, identify the appropriate economic principle and justify your answer. Right? Most of your points is going to come from you justifying your answer. Even if the economic principle you identified isn't the one that I had thought about for this question, if you can reasonably justify why a different economic principle would be applicable, you can get your full marks. That's why it's so important to be able to justify your answer. So then, the government of the Bahamas creates a huge new public park that takes up most of what is currently Baintown, Nassau. They've created what they call the new Nassau Central Park, similar to that big park they have in New York. And that's all the information you're given. Can we relate this to any economic principle that we have come across?
Externality.
Principle of externality? Okay, fine. So let's say you pick that principle. Now you have to justify it. And in this case, if you're picking the principle of externality, then the way you would justify that is you would identify at least one positive externality from this event and one negative externality, and that will give you your full marks. Can you do that?
One positive and one negative you have to present.
Yes. So there's a great big new park in what used to be Baintown. Is there any positive externality to that?
Yeah, I would say, sir, my argument would be that it gives persons an opportunity for a better environment to exercise, to use in societal events.
Okay. Fine.
That would be my positive.
And these people didn't pay for this park, right?
No, they did not, sir. Was it-
Because
it
if
says that the
if
government-
they pay for the park, that's a different story.
Mhm.
Okay, then what about what's the drawback? A negative externality to this big new park?
Drawback is that you took up the majority of being town, which most people live in being town. First of all, I think you can get that park built. Not if you're taking people's properties. Because
I'm the
that's what
government, I
they,
can do whatever I want.
No,
I
you can get,
understand. I
you can-
understand that you can pay me what my land is worth, but
No,
you,
no, 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 I didn't say anything with paying you. There's
But you can't-
there's a concept called imminent domain, where the government will say, I need this piece of property.
but
And
isn't that,
I will
is-
pay you what I think I can pay you. Now,
is
you
that
can
what
take
would
me to
it-
court as much as you like, but
isn't
yes.
that tenure? Isn't land ownership by tenure? If I'm right, banking law, I'm trying to remember it.
No, I
The
don't
government-
care. None of that matters. No, see, none of that matters because the law of imminent domain says that a government, any government, and it is quite common. Almost every country that I'm aware of has a similar law that says that for the public good, the government can acquire right of way, can acquire land, and in most cases, they can make an offer to you for the land. But if you insist upon being stubborn, they could just take it.
You just built on something that I think it was
Uh-huh.
Ms. Archer said in banking law when she covered law. You said that's
Yes.
eminent domain?
Yes, eminent domain.
Wow.
Yeah. This similarly, you would see this most often when, for example, the government through one of its agencies like BPL wants to run a high tension electricity line, say across New Providence, and insists on getting a certain stretch of land to run this high tension cable. The government will buy up or acquire the necessary right of way for this. It is controversial. It is certainly unfair, but it's very legal. So if the government decided that the government can quite easily just simply condemn any building that's in its way. So don't say they can't do it. It's So, but if you were to choose the principle of externality, yes, you've identified appropriate positive and negative externalities that would apply in this case. And I'm sure other students would be able to think of different positive and negative externalities. You just want to make sure that whatever you think of fits the definition of a positive or negative externality. So you think about it to make sure that you're not dragging people into this who are involved. Okay, fine. Scenario, you're being asked to work overtime for an additional $50 an hour. That's some good overtime. Problem is, you have a midterm exam coming up and you know that you really need to study if you are to pass.
Principle of voluntary exchange.
Explain.
Your time, well, because you're being asked to work overtime for an additional $50 an hour, you're exchanging your time for money. Even though you have a midterm coming up, you know that you really need to study it to pass. You have the right to exchange your time for whichever one that you wish to do. Is either you study for your midterm or you work overtime and get money for your time. That's up to you.
If the question is simply indicated you're being asked to work overtime for additional $50 an hour, would you accept? That, I think, would be principle of voluntary exchange. I could justify that. Because you're saying, the only reason I would work overtime if I think the $50 is worth it to me. And the only reason why someone would offer to pay you $50 overtime if they think the labor is worth it to them, that would work. But when you bring in this whole midterm exam thing, that adds an additional element that you have to account for. And the principle of voluntary exchange doesn't speak to, sacrifices.
And I think, can I try? I would like to put forward opportunity costs, because
Okay.
you're losing the opportunity of studying in order to facilitate working this particular overtime. So it's something that you have to sacrifice in there. So I would use opportunity costs.
Here's the question then. All right. You're looking at the principal opportunity cost, and you're sacrificing, you're saying, studying for this $50 for working overtime. Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But if you weren't working overtime, what would you most rather have been doing with that time? Would it really have been no. You may have to study, but that's not what you would want to do, right? The principal opportunity cost isn't any alternative, is what you most rather have been doing with that time if you weren't working. And it wouldn't have been studying. Studying is something you have to do. Studying is something you may do at the last resort. Studying may be something you do because you don't want to fail. But if you had your way, you wouldn't spend the time studying.
Okay, somebody else.
I'd like to try.
By all means.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you are Bain?
Bernice.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bernice. Okay, yes.
The diminishing return.
All right. Explain.
Okay, I think it's that because although you're gaining $50 an hour, you are still you're gaining more, but you're still losing that time you would have spent studying. I think that's why.
So let's see if I'm following you and maybe cleaning up your logic. So you're saying, or maybe this is not what you're saying, and please correct me.
Okay.
For every additional hour you work overtime, you get $50, right?
Yeah.
But for every additional hour you work, that means the chances of you passing this exam goes down.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If you explain it like that, perhaps. Yeah. Okay.
So what should it be?
There's no what should it be. It's, I had thought.
Right. What were you thinking?
Like Bernice certainly would have worked if she explained it like that. I was thinking more in terms of, was an opportunity cost? My thing is going off. Voluntary exchange? No. Reality principle? No. What's left?
Marginal
principle.
Principle.
Okay. All right.
Marginal principle.
What's the marginal benefit of working? You get an extra $50 every hour.
An hour.
What's the marginal cost?
The loss of study, the loss of being able to study.
Loss of being able to study.
Yes.
And so you would continue to work as long as the money that you're making, you think the benefit that you acquire, the satisfaction, not necessarily whatever this money is to you, depending on how important it is to you, as long as that exceeds the risk of you failing this exam, you continue to work. See, listen, if you think I'm a good place in terms of this exam, I may be willing to put in more hours over time to know I don't need to study as much as I would have done if I hadn't done some pre-studying. But if I know I haven't done any review work at all, I may only be willing to put in 1 hour, one hour. That's $50. That may be, that's it. Listen, I appreciate this, but I really need to study, kind of thing. But both the marginal principle and the principle of diminishing returns, any of those argued correctly, I think, would work for this. I don't think you can you can use opportunity cost for this. Well, yeah, you could. No, because you would not have wanted to study. Because see, studying is not a want to, studying is a have to. Right? So when we talk about sacrificing, you're not sacrificing $50 an hour to study. You may be sacrificing $50 an hour to be hanging with your friends. $50 an hour, sacrificing $50 an hour to be with your loved one, canoodling or whatever the two do ending together. Right. That would be a sacrifice, but that's not what it's saying here. You would not sacrifice this $50 an hour to study. So the principle of opportunity costs, that would be a tough argument to make here. Another tough argument would be voluntary exchange because of the exam thing. The overtime thing all by itself would certainly work for voluntary exchange, but when you stick that exam piece on the end, that makes it tough. Yes, but either the marginal principle or the principle of diminishing returns, you can argue either one of those if you argue it well and get full marks. All right. What about number 3? The police department develops a new unit that only deals with traffic offenses, and it aggressively monitors and enforces all traffic laws, issuing tickets even for minor offenses. Anyone want to take a stab at it? All right, so
Reality of principles.
can we decide what it's not? Is it reality principle? Is there any money involved? Any purchasing power? I don't see anything there. So I would scratch reality principle, sorry. Yes, the reality principle. What about principle of voluntary exchange? There's nothing voluntary about
Voluntary there. You that voluntary there.
traffic ticket. No, ain't involuntary there. All right, fine. All right, what about, I don't know, externality. Whether you are the policeman or the person getting the ticket, you're involved. Right?
Right.
Although, hang on.
I'm looking at it as well because they do have one positive and one negative.
Do tell. I'm thinking one too. I hadn't thought about it, but now I'm looking at it again. What would be a positive of this situation? We have aggressive monitoring of the traffic laws in the country.
I think if you're actually, so one thing in this country we don't do enough of. If we were aggressively monitoring and enforcing all traffic laws and issuing tickets, I think we would not have as much reckless driving. People would kind of think twice in driving recklessly and acting foolish on the road. So that would be a deterrent. So that's the positive aspect. The negative side of it is that that's not a sensible argument. Because I would have said, listen, the negative part is, you're losing your money.
No, but you're involved. You're the one who got the
You're involved.
ticket, so you don't count. But see, okay, on the one hand, I can agree the improvement in law, order, and safety. You know, even if whether or not I get a ticket or not, right? I still benefit because of improvement in the way people drive. You would agree?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
All right. So, okay, so I'm not necessarily involved in this process, or even if I don't drive a car at all, I still benefit from this new program. Fine, but is there any drawback to me, even I don't drive? But is there a negative, a drawback to anyone from this for this program? Anyone who's not involved, except the people getting the tickets.
My
Possible
argument would go ahead, Curry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking more of like it can possibly cause a lot of traffic too, because when when
Yes.
police officers
Okay.
stop you, the detours that you have to take, it can cause you to be late for work. It could cause you to be late to a bunch of different things. You might have a lot of things that you might have to do,
Sure, you can say traffic, that will work. Increased possibility of corruption. If police have to sort of make a quota of tickets that they have to write, it could lead to possibility of increased attempted bribery. So if you sit down and think about it, you might be able to come up with some negatives associated with that.
But Mr. Demerit, not to
Sure.
cut you off, but wouldn't the increase of bribery affect you as well if you were one of the people to get catch? If you were to think about it?
Yes. Okay, so scratch that, because you would have had to be caught to be bribing the police in the first place.
Right, and in that case, what you don't know can't hurt you in that case.
All right. Okay, but certainly the likelihood of corruption within this unit.
Okay.
Right. If their supervisors, their higher ups, are putting pressure on them to aggressively enforce all traffic laws, what's the likelihood of they start writing tickets even for non-offenses?
Highly likely. Because those people who don't know the road traffic laws might probably just yield to whatever it is to just leave, and and then it causes a lot of unnecessary buildup on a lot of different parts. So
yeah, you can also talk about increased impact on the court systems, judges, clerks, whomever. They're not the police, and they're not the general public, but where they used to hear 5-6 cases a day, now they're hearing 50-60. It is possible to make arguments. Yeah, it's just how well you justify your choice of principles. Is there any other principle that you would want to use here, that you could use here?
I would go with there's a possibility of overworking police too at this point in time, because where they went from 5 tickets a day, now they're producing 20 tickets a day. So they're working double. They're working harder in the same hours that they're allotted.
And you would still put that under your principle of externality as a negative?
That could be a negative, because there's a lot more room for mistakes then too.
Okay. All right. I think that the mistake angle is a good one as a negative externality. So you're saying the police may not intend to make mistakes. They may not intend to write tickets for non-offenses, but they are working so hard, and it's possible. Okay.
And not even that, even in terms of jotting down license plate, you could easily transpose numbers, and you're giving a ticket to this person, but the license on the ticket is not related to the person you're giving the ticket to. It's related to somebody completely different. So, you know,
But you get the idea though.
Yeah.
You really have to sit down and think your way through these things to see, okay, does this make sense? And can I justify this under the principle? All right, fine. Marijuana has been made legal for recreational use.
Reality principle, right?
Explain.
Marijuana being illegal for such a long time, it of course, because it's on, like, let's just say backhand, it costed maybe $5 for a roach. Let's just say now that it's legal, there are a lot of fees that will be implemented, and the price of it might probably go up. Like, let's just say VAT is inclusive of it, but that would be the reality of it. I mean,
Boy, that's that deep. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Because,
that hard.
like,
That's a deep argument.
yeah, because I mean, my thought of it is that the face value back then would have been like, hey, $3 for
No, but that's the face value of the money. That's not the face value of marijuana. The issue here is that we've legalized marijuana.
so the cost of it went down.
You sure?
That's what's going to happen.
but
Because
why would it go down?
But he's arguing it went up. It would go up.
it would go down because it's legal now. People don't have to take the risk that they used to take to bring it in anymore.
So you're saying part of the cost of marijuana now is the risk associated with the illegal activity.
Exactly. So because it's illegal and they have to pay whoever is bringing this in, they have to make their monies back for what
But
they pay.
what does that have to do with the reality principle?
I'm just,
I mean, because if you look at it in that type of way, with the supply and demand, because they have to pay more money to bring it in versus when they were smuggling it for free. Now they have to pay more money to get these goods into the people based off of the supply and demand. So
Yeah, but
I mean,
the value of the money hasn't changed. Saying?
And not only that, with it being legal, wouldn't that mean that we would grow at home and would not have to import as well?
I mean, that's a possibility, but that is going to take years because we've never been growing it before. So how do we know how to?
Yeah, but see, my problem still remains, how do you tie this close to one of the principles? Because at the end of the day, that's what we have to do. All right.
so
Principle of voluntary exchange, I would say.
Okay.
what would it be?
Ah.
Diminishing return?
How does making marijuana legal apply to the principle of voluntary exchange?
Could it be externality again? Because if you're looking at it, it's a product and it has to have some benefit. It might have
Hang on. Before we get to that, I'm still on this voluntary exchange thing. How would that work? Because, okay, voluntary exchange says that, okay, here we made marijuana legal.
Right.
So where's the exchange taking place?
The exchange takes place between the buyer and the seller. So that's voluntary exchange. Both parties are better
Right.
off.
But
Both
weren't we both thought we were better off when it was illegal? Because the only reason why you would smoke marijuana now, it is still illegal, is that you think you would be better off smoking it. And the only reason somebody would sell it to you now is they think they would be better off selling it to you. So you already, the principle of voluntary exchange is already in place now. So why would making it legal change that?
Because there's no risk now of going to jail with selling it.
Yeah,
There's no risk involved. Whereas
Okay.
before there was a risk. And I don't know, I'm grasping it.
All right, okay. right now, you're paying whatever you're paying to take a class at the institute.
Mhm.
So clearly that is a case of voluntary exchange. Would you agree?
Yes,
The only reason you would pay that amount is if you think at the end of the day you would be better off.
right.
The only reason the school is offering the course at that rate is they think at the end of the day they'll be better off.
Right.
Voluntary exchange.
Okay.
What if the price went down by 25%, the cost of the course? Would that change anything? In terms of the principle, there would still be, the only reason why they would be willing to reduce their cost by 25% is that they think they would be better off even at a lower cost. And then the reason why you would continue to pay less than 25%, 25% less than you paid previously, is obviously you think you're better off. In either case, we're still talking about the principle of voluntary exchange. It doesn't matter whether the weed is legal or illegal, and the voluntary exchange is still going to take place. It's just going to take place maybe between two different customers. Right? Someone like me who said, you know what, legal or not, a little toke in the afternoon makes me feel good. Right? Somebody like you may decide, listen, that's not worth it to me. All right. Whether it's legal or not, the principle of voluntary exchange is still going to be apply here. That's not necessarily going to change. The customers may change, the price may change, but the principle won't have changed. So I'm not sure you can apply that principle to this because it's kind of hard to justify what would be the difference. Ideally, what I would think, and again, I would be happy to have somebody else input here, but I would think I probably could come up with some negative externalities and some positive externalities for marijuana now being legal for recreational use. Right? Certainly a lot more people smoking could have some negative consequences. Even for people who are not, who are not involved in the industry. Right? I really don't want somebody high and driving on the street next to me. It may not make any difference, or it might, I don't know. But I would prefer, if you're high, I don't need you on the road next to me. At the same time, though, I guess a positive externality may be, we're not locking people up for these small little petty stuff. A little dime bag, or what did you call it? A little roach? A little $5 roach. You really want to lock somebody up for that? So we may have a lot fewer persons in jail for these sort of petty drug offenses. But that's just me. That, without more information, I think that's probably the only one I can really justify applying there. What about number 5? Cost of living went up 7.5%. You got a 10% raise. Why are you smiling? Oh, don't get shy now.
Reality principle.
Because even though cost of living, and we're going to change that terminology somewhere around the middle of the course, because that's not really applicable for us. It's a poor term, and I wish people would stop using it. But anyway, until we get to the reason why, we'll stick with it. Yes, although the cost of living went up by 7.5%, you got a 10% raise, you're better off. It'd be nice if the cost of living didn't go up at all and you got a 10% raise, but you're still better off than you were before. Your purchasing power of your income has gone up by 2.5%. That's the only applicable principle that is useful here. Now, here's an interesting one. You're in the landscaping business. Each new hire increases your revenue per worker by an additional 10%. So every time you hire somebody, you have to pay them 10% more than the person you hired before them. This certainly occurs when you have sort of a very tight labor market. A good example would be when Atlantis first opened up. Right? Atlantis was looking for 6,000 additional workers at the time. Right? And they were looking for experienced hotel workers. And they really were looking to hire people from other hotels. And the only reason why you're going to leave, it was whatever the Cable Beach Hotel is that they knocked down. Crystal Palace. No, Crystal Palace. Right. You can move from Crystal Palace to Atlantis is for more money. All other things being equal. Right. So the only way Atlantis was getting its extra people was offering them more money. And as they got closer to meeting their 6,000 personnel goal, they found that they had to offer more and more money to each new hiree to get them to come. Because eventually you get to the point where the people are very happy in their current position. And, first of all, you have some set of people who you can offer another, an extra $5 an hour when they come over. But by the time you get near the end and you're trying to hire salary workers, you may be offering them, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year more than what they were making. Plus, you may have to sweeten that with some additional benefits, et cetera, et cetera. In any case, bottom line is, they end up having to pay new workers even more than the ones they hired earlier. Okay. And that's not uncommon. So you're looking to expand your landscaping business, and each new hire increases your revenue per worker by a further 10%. But each new hire increases your labor cost per worker by 12%. Currently, your weekly revenue is $3,000, and your weekly labor cost is $2,500. How many additional workers do you hire? This one will give you double points.
I like two.
First of all, can you identify the principle?
Diminishing returns.
No.
Or margin. Okay. I think I see marginal principle because you're looking at the benefits and the costs.
Exactly. All right. So, for half of a point, you identified the correct principle. For the other 4.5 points, how many additional workers do you hire? You cannot do this in your head. So, we said what labor cost is, revenue is $10 per worker. All right, revenues is 3,000. Let's see. Do I have space to do it here? Oops. You guys have paper in front of you, right? Obviously, because you wouldn't be in class if you didn't. So let's say, make sure I know what I'm dealing with. Revenues is 3,000. I lost my space. Revenues 3,000 per week. And what's my labor costs?
2,500.
2,500.
Labor costs all right. Now, what do they tell us about revenues? The change in revenues.
That's the difference between.
No. Let's go to the question first.
Sorry.
when we hire people, our revenues go up by 10% for each new worker. All right. So when we hire that first new worker, how much does our revenue go up by? 10%, right? So let's call that revenues, worker one. Worker one, revenue goes up by $30, 10%. Sorry, $300. Oops, where'd I go? Yes? Okay, let's go back to the question. Question says, for each new hire, increases my revenue per worker by 10%. What about labor? How much is this new person costing me?
12% of the labor cost,
12%.
which is
So labor costs, sorry. All right. Revenue for worker one, 15% of 2,500.
12% is 300.
Is it 12 or 15%?
12.
Well,
Well,
All right, so if my labor cost is 2,500 per week, what's the cost for me to hire this worker? So it's 12% of 2,500.
300.
300?
Yes, sir.
So you did 2,500 times multiplied by 0.12, right?
Yes, sir.
300.
Right. Okay, good. Okay. So then, that was worker one. What about worker two?
Worker two revenue would be what, 3,300? 330, sorry.
All right. Remember now, we said it costs us an additional 10% every time we hire another worker. So
Right.
this would be 330.
Right.
All right. And for labor, it's additional 12%. So
Right.
that's what? That's 360. Isn't it? Sorry.
No, that's 336.
336?
Yes, sir.
Fine. Does that look right?
no, let me see if I have it correct. Y'all please correct me if I'm not following. Labor costs traditionally went to, per worker, to
No.
12%. 12%,
Yeah.
would that equate to $360 for the labor cost?
60. That's why I got
360. Worker one, if we made $300, right, in revenue, but it costs us 12% per worker, or 12% for more, then either the first or the second answer needs to be 360, eh?
Isn't that what I said?
so what? So hold on, because wouldn't it be 12% of the 2,800 of the labor cost?
2,500.
Why would it be 2,500 again if the labor cost went up by $300?
No. Yes, you're right. Okay.
Yes,
So,
yes,
And,
2,800.
and so it will be 12% of 2,800.
Correct. So that would be the new labor cost with the second worker would be 3,136, which would be 336 the extra labor.
Yeah, something's not quite right here. I have to look at this again. No, nothing you guys have done wrong. I just think it's the original numbers are off. I'm trying to do it in my head.
Unless it's supposed to be 15% instead of 12.
No, it's supposed to be 5% instead of 12. All right. All right, I'll look at it again, but the way you approach is once you've identified that as marginal principle, you need to create two columns: marginal benefit of the additional activity, the marginal cost of the additional activity. Right. And then you see, as long as marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost, that's why I know this is supposed to be 5%, because the marginal benefit of hiring additional worker is supposed to exceed the marginal cost of hiring that additional worker. As long as that continues to happen, you should continue to hire workers.
Unlimited amount.
Until such time as the cost of hiring the very next worker is exactly equal to the revenue from hiring that very next worker.
But-
I look
but
at it again,
Is it the
and we'll
merit?
talk about it on Wednesday before your homework goes out.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I was only saying it because I was looking at the numbers and based off of how it is, it doesn't seem that it would ever touch the same amount of revenue that would be equal to the labor cost if you use those numbers. Because 5%, 5% of 2,500 is
Yeah.
125.
No. This.
Oh, okay.
And they will cross.
Yeah, they go for us for sure.
Mm.
Sure.
Okay. Like I said, I look at it again, and we'll have another conversation. But those are kind of questions that you would see. It won't be all 6. It may be 4. 4 of those and 4 of the production possibility curves question. All right. Okay. Did we talk at all about absolute and comparative advantage last class? I don't think we did. All right. So take a deep breath. Again, we're looking at foundational concepts, foundational elements in our discussion. And one of the things that we come across quite often is the question of absolute versus comparative advantage for an economy. We want to be able to precisely define what we mean and then how those concepts are applied. So first of all, a definition of absolute advantage: an individual or an economy is said to have an absolute advantage over another individual or economy if it can produce more of a given good or service. Right? As long as you produce more, you have an absolute advantage. So if we're comparing, say, the Bahamas to South Florida, does South Florida produce more tourism services than the Bahamas? Do they have more visitors than the Bahamas? Sure. Disney World alone has what, 11 million visitors a year. The entire Bahamas has 7 million just before COVID. South Florida in total, from Miami to Orlando, about 28, almost 30 million visitors a year. So clearly they produce more tourism services than we do. They have an absolute advantage in the production of tourism services. Right. They also produce citrus, orange, tangerine, grapefruit. We in the Bahamas also produce citrus, orange, tangerine, grapefruit. But they produce a lot more citrus than we do. They have an absolute advantage in the production of citrus than we do. Similarly for winter vegetables. Right? So South Florida has an absolute advantage in the production of tourism services compared to the Bahamas, and they have an absolute advantage in the production of citrus compared to the Bahamas. Does that make sense so far? If you can produce
Yes.
more, you have an absolute advantage. On the other hand, comparative advantage is slightly different. An individual or an economy is said to have a comparative advantage over another individual or economy if it can produce more of that good at a lower opportunity cost. Right? If they sacrifice less to produce whatever it is they're producing. So let's go back to our tourism and our citrus example, comparing South Florida to the Bahamas. If the Bahamas is looking to build up another resort on, I don't know, Maguana, What is it sacrificing to do that? What's on Make One now?
Okay.
What is on Mikwana now?
That is the
Okay.
question.
Old people and some young children? A lot of bush?
Old people in
Mosquito?
gas station.
Old people in bush.
So for us to build a mega resort and make one, we're not really sacrificing much, are we? Certainly, we're also not sacrificing any good agricultural land because we don't have much of that anywhere in the Bahamas. What about South Florida? If they wanted to build another Disney World, where are they going to put that? Are you going to fill in some of the Everglades? Pave over some of your good agricultural land? It's a much bigger sacrifice for them to build another mega resort. So the Bahamas would have a comparative advantage in the tourism sector because for us, it's less of a sacrifice for us to increase our tourism output. What about citrus? If South Florida wants to increase its orange, tangerine, and grapefruit groves, it may mean that some of the suburban expansion can't take place because we have a giant farm in its way. And we can't put up another tourism resort because we're growing oranges here. So you see, they make a much bigger sacrifice if they wanted to increase their agricultural production compared to, say, us. Let's say we wanted to build a big grapefruit farm on Andros. Is that much of a sacrifice?
No.
Probably not.
No.
And certainly nowhere near as much as the sacrifice that South Florida would be doing. So you can see then that even though South Florida has an absolute advantage in the production of both tourism and citrus, we in the Bahamas have a comparative advantage because we sacrifice less. And that allows us to continue to be in those industries when our main competitor is less than 100 miles away, because we sacrifice less. We have a comparative advantage. That's the difference. Right? Now, you can do a little math associated with that. Right? But all I really want us to focus on, and you know, in your second homework, you may have a one or two questions about this, but you'll have this example to work with. In this case, you have the production of shirts and bicycles between Italy and China. Both countries produce shirts, both countries produce bicycles. In an hour, Italy can produce 50 shirts and 75 bicycles. And in an hour, China could produce 100 shirts and 200 bicycles. China has an absolute advantage in the production of both shirts and bicycles because it can produce more of each in an hour. But what about comparative advantage? Right. Think about it. Look at China. For every bicycle that China produces, it could have in fact produced 200 shirts. Right. So the opportunity cost of one bicycle is 2 shirts. So for every bicycle it produces, it gives up the opportunity, the possibility of producing 2 shirts, or you can put it the other way around. On the other hand, look at Italy. For every 1 bicycle that Italy produces, it gives us the possibility of producing 75 divided by 50, 1.5 shirts. That's about as difficult as the math is going to get. All right. What are we interested in knowing? All we're saying is that if you have a comparative advantage, That is, if you sacrifice less. We have in the Bahamas a fairly well-educated population. I know we have a lot of, D students. Scratch that. I'm not going to get into that. Doesn't get all political. I'm not for that. All right. If you have a comparative advantage, you sacrifice less to be in the industry that you're in, then what we said is that it makes sense for you to specialize in producing that item, that good, that service, and then trade for whatever else that you may need. In the case of the Bahamas, because we're able to produce tourism services at a lower opportunity cost than, say, South Florida, we have a comparative advantage in the production of tourism services. It then makes sense for us to focus our attention on tourism services and then use the money to then buy everything else that we're going to need. Right? And that's what we do. The reason that why we're in the tourism business is because we have a comparative advantage, even though we don't have an absolute advantage compared to South Florida. We have a comparative advantage, and therefore we focus a lot of our attention on tourism services. Right? That's why we don't build cars, we don't assemble computers. We sacrifice very little to be in the tourism industry. So all we want to take from the whole discussion of comparative and absolute advantage is that if you have a comparative advantage, that's where you focus your attention, because you are sacrificing less to be in that industry. All right. And these are some of the numbers that we've thrown around for comparative and absolute advantage. All right. And I certainly encourage you to do the reading, but all we're really focusing on is that because the Bahamas has a comparative advantage, it focuses on tourism. Right. Because the Bahamas has a comparative advantage in citrus, we produce citrus, even though South Florida has an absolute advantage in both. Okay. We have shown this definition earlier, I think last week. A simple definition of goods and factor markets, but what we want to do then is now incorporate those definitions into a very simplified economy. Right? All we want to do is what is called looking at the flow of goods and services throughout an economy, what is called the circular flow. Let's get our definition down. Here's the diagram, and we'll come back to it. I'm sure you have it in your book. The circular flow diagram presents a very simple economy. Right? It shows how the flow of goods and services move through the economy. In addition, it shows how income and revenue flow from the production and sale of these goods and services. But it's a very simple economy. Remember, we said one of the things we do with economics is that we simplify, but not so much as to stop us from being able to understand the fundamentals. We simplify to facilitate learning. And one of the ways that we simplify this economy is that, well, we strip away the international economy. So no exports, no imports. And we also eliminate government. Government makes everything messy. Right. And even without government and without imports and exports, we can still see how goods flow through our economy and how money flows through our economy. Right. So let's look at this very simplified economy and what we call the circular flow diagram. I hope you can see this, otherwise you may have to open your books to get a good look at it. On the one hand, we have what is the goods market. That's the very top of the diagram. And this is where the price of goods are determined. The bottom of the diagram is the factor market. I remember with the factor market, we said this is where the price of the factors of production are determined. And we have also in this market, we have households who own the factor of production. The households own the labor, they own the natural resources, either directly or through their government. They own certainly the human capital, physical capital by their investment, and they would be the entrepreneurs. So the households, they own the factor of production. The firms use the factor of production, the factors of production to produce goods and services, which they in turn sell to the households. Right? So let's start with the households. That's on the very left. All right, and we can see, if you look at the arrows going from households to the factor market, it says factors of production, including labor, capital, physical capital, human capital, etc., are flowing from households to the factor market. That's where they're priced, right? Good example would be the labor market. It's one of the factor markets, and it is where the price of your labor determined. And as far as the firms are concerned, the factors of production are its inputs in the production process. So we see where factors of production flow from households, they're priced in the fact market, and they end up in the firms as its input in the production process. Firms then use these inputs to produce consumption goods. As far as the company is concerned, consumption goods are its outputs. That's what it produces, and it then prices those outputs or those consumption goods in the goods market, and the products are then purchased by households, and these are considered as household consumption. So households own the factor of production. Those factors of production are used by the firms as inputs in this production process. The firms use those inputs to produce consumption goods, which are its outputs, and those consumption goods are then sold to the households. So we see on the outer ring, the flow of products and goods, factor production and goods, are flowing from households to firms, and the outputs by the firms are then sold to the households. So goods go in one direction, but money goes in the other direction. As far as the households is concerned, when we provide our factor production, when we provide our labor, we expect to get something in return. So households get things like wages, interest, dividends, rents. Those would be its revenue from the sale of its factors of production. Okay. Wages, interest, dividends, and rents. As far as the firm is concerned, when the firm has to pay for its factors of production, its inputs, the firm considers that, okay, those are my expenditures. When I'm paying for the input of goods and services, as far as the firm is concerned, those are my expenditures. Now, when the firm sells the goods that it has produced, the firm considers that that's its income or its revenues. And when households purchase these goods, households consider that it's household spending on its consumption of goods and services. So the money flows from the households to purchase goods and services to the firms in the form of its income or revenue. The firm spends that money as its expenditures to purchase factors of production, and that money then flows back to the households in terms of wages, interest, dividends, rents, etc. But you can see it's a very simplified version of an economy. It's called a circular flow diagram, and it shows factors of production and goods moving in one direction, and income, revenue, and expenditures flowing in the other direction. Any questions? All right, fine. Oh, good, I got time. Again, new topic. So we've covered comparative and absolute advantage, circle flow diagram, and we want to look at the role of the government. Because we said initially, we have excluded government from our circular flow diagram because government complicates, did I say messes up? Complicates things. All right. And what we want to do is really take a look at the role of the government separately because the government is so important in any economy. So what is the role of any government? And here we're not categorizing whether we're talking about a market-based economy or a communist-based economy or a socialist economy. Right? These are general functions and roles of any government. Certainly, governments are expected to provide goods and services. And there are two types of goods and services, non-rivalrous or non-excludable, and we will define each as we go along. So government provides goods and services. Government is also expected to redistribute incomes. That is help the poor and the downtrodden, those out of work, et cetera, et cetera. Government does the taxing, right? Government is responsible for regulating of business practices, and governments are responsible for national trade policies. So 5 big categories in terms of the roles of government, and we'll talk about each in a moment. But governments provide goods and services. Governments redistribute incomes. That is, they help those who do not or who need help. Government taxes us, whether we like it or not, regulate business practices, and they implement trade policy. Right? So let's talk about providing goods and services. Most economic arguments for why government should be involved in our business, government's intervention are based on the idea that the marketplace cannot always provide goods or handle externalities. So government is there to do the things that the private sector can't or won't do. All right. So for example, I don't know, police. All right. If you left up to only the people who could afford security services, yeah, our country, our economy will look very, very different. All right. So public security service is considered something that government can provide because the private sector can't or won't provide it. So most economic arguments for government intervention are based on the idea that the marketplace cannot provide what we call public goods, and the marketplace or private sector cannot handle externalities. So when we talk about public goods, there are 2 terms that we apply to distinguish what we mean by a public good. A public good has to have 2 distinct aspects, and both of these have to apply for a good to be considered a public good. There must be non-excludability and non-rivalrous. Right? Any good or service that we're talking about must be non-excludable and non-rivalrous for us to consider it a public good. So what do we mean by non-excludability, and what do we mean by non-rivalrous? Non-excludability means that non-payers cannot be excluded from the benefit of that good or service. So even though you're not contributing, you're still benefiting. So even if you don't pay any taxes, you still be able to pick up and call 911 or 919 and the police should come. We talked about the big park in Baintown. Just because you're out of work and you don't pay taxes or whatever, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy the park. Right? we cannot exclude people or exclude non-payers. So for a public good, it must be non-excludable. We cannot tell non-payers that they cannot benefit from the good or service. And secondly, non-rivalrous. That's supposed to be capital N. If you don't mind, let me fix that. Non-rivalrous means that consumption by one individual doesn't preclude the consumption of the same good by another individual. Right. Examples of what we call public good, if you think about it, public health and welfare programs, public education. Right. All kids have a right to go to school. Yeah. Public school, whether the parents are working or not working. Most of the roads in the Bahamas, except for bridges, are public roads. You do not pay to drive your car on the road. Research and development, national and domestic security, a lot of environmental stuff could be considered public goods. All right. Fireworks. What do you think, public or private?
Fireworks?
Fireworks. Let's say July 10th, fireworks display.
Unless it's the tattoo.
What do you
It's-
mean? Is it
Tattoo.
non-excludable? Who pays for the fireworks?
Government.
It depends, because Atlantis has fireworks, and then the
Let's say,
government has
all right,
fireworks.
let's say Atlantis fireworks display. Is it public or private?
Public,
Why?
because everybody is welcome to see it.
Everybody gets to see it, not just the people on the property.
It's not fixed to a certain crowd.
Okay, so it's not excludable.
Correct.
Right? Even non-Atlantis guests can still see it. You don't even have to be on the property to see it. All right, fine. Is it non-rivalrous? If I'm watching it, can you also watch it?
Yes.
Right? So no matter how intently I stare at it, it doesn't change how much you can stare at it too. So we can't stop people from seeing it even if they're not guests of Atlantis. So it's non-excludable and it's non-rivalrous, because no matter how much one person consumes that fireworks display, another person can consume the same fireworks display.
Yes.
Okay. That's our definition of a public good. All right. An apartment, public or private?
Private.
Private.
Why? Is it non-excludable?
Yes.
If you're not paying the rent, you can't live there. Is it non-rivalrous?
Yes.
If you're living in that apartment in that apartment, some other family can move in there too. So it is excludable and it is rivalrous. All right. Prime Minister's national address on radio or TV. Is it non-excludable?
No,
It's non-excludable
it's not. But do they want to hear it though?
because everybody is welcome to the information.
It's
So you don't have to pay to hear it.
Correct.
Right. Is it non-rivalrous?
Boy.
If I'm listening to it,
No.
does that stop you from
No.
listening
No,
to it?
it's
No,
not.
no, it
No,
doesn't.
it's not.
So it's non-excludable and it's non-rivalrous, therefore it is public. All right, fine. Pizza.
It's non-excludable, but it is non-rivalous.
All right. If you don't pay for it, can you eat it?
Depend on who pay for it.
Yeah, you
Right.
could eat it, but you may took something else with it.
So really, it's not excludable because you can stop somebody who didn't pay for it from eating it, right? It's my pizza, I ordered it, find something else. Even if you live in the same house with me, even if you're my wife.
You call.
But technically, it is excludable. Right?
Okay,
Just because you can stop somebody from benefiting from that good if they didn't pay for it. I could exclude somebody. I admit it might be cold if that's your wife or your spouse or whomever, right? And it's definitely rivalrous because if I eat it, you can eat it too.
mhm.
All right?
I mean, if it's a different slice, you get.
Yeah, that's a different slice, but you can't eat the slice that I ate.
Boy, you know about these women, boy, Mr. Demare, they like eat off your plate, man.
Yeah, but she can eat her spoonful. She ain't eating the spoonful out in my mouth.
Okay, that's fair.
Right. So that's what we mean. You say two persons cannot consume the exact same thing. They consume pieces. Right? So a pizza is both excludable and rivalrous. Therefore, it is considered a private good. All right. So you get the idea. So if I give you a list of goods, and all you need to do is tell me whether it is public or private. We're thinking towards homework number 2, in case you haven't guessed. All right, fine. And certainly kind of exam type stuff. So what else? So government provides goods and services. What about redistributing income? The distribution or redistribution of income is central to one of the enduring issues in politics. In general, this means redistributing income from the haves to the have-nots. And there are 2 types of government redistribution schemes that we're concerned ourselves about. One is called subsidies, such as national insurance benefit payments. Right? And these are transfer payment programs funded through general taxes that benefit the poor who may or may not pay taxes. Right? On the other hand, we have transfers, persons receiving transfers from such programs. Excuse me a second, my dog is going to get himself spanked. Okay. Now, I always insert here some clarification regarding our own National Insurance Board. Right? Our National Insurance Board is really 2 agencies in one. We have what is called a transfer agency, or a benefit agency, and a Social Security agency. You know, in the United States, they have the Social Security Administration, right? They issue pension checks, and that's pretty much it, all right? Our National Insurance Board also does that through its pension program. But our National Insurance Board also provides benefits, right? Old age benefit, retirement, not retirement benefit, old age benefit. You know, they pay you if you had a baby. They pay you if somebody dies. You know, they pay you if you're out of work. Right? So they have these benefit programs. And one of the things for Bahamians, we confuse the 2. Right? We know that national insurance takes a levy on our salaries, national insurance payments. And we mistakenly believe that that money pays for the benefits. We do not and a lot of Bahamians think, okay, well, I am paying all this in national insurance payments, then I should be able to get these kind of benefits. And those who didn't pay shouldn't get the benefits. That's not the way the program is structured. Similarly, we think our national insurance payments should be matched by our national insurance pension payments. And again, they do not match up. Right? If you notice anything about national insurance pension, it's maxed out, I think about what, $1,500 or $1,700 a month tops. Regardless of how much salary you're making prior to that, that's the most you can get in pension. So you have the pension side of it, and the benefits are what we call transfer payments. The transfer payments has nothing to do with pension. They just happen to reside in the same agency. And we Bahamians sort of conflate the two. I don't know why, but they do. All right. Goods and services, redistributing income, taxation. Taxes is a means by which government finances expenditures by imposing charges on citizens and corporate entities. Yes, this is our very formal definition. Taxes are a way for the government to pool some amounts of important resources from the private sector to the public sector and ensure that governments have the ability to provide basic safety and community systems, yada, 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 yada. Okay, fine. We know government taxes us. Taxes are vital to support the infrastructure that we as citizens rely on at the local and national levels. In addition, taxes support national defense, road construction, social services program, public health and education. The big question that we want to ask and the big question that we're trying to answer, though, we understand that we're going to be taxed regardless. But what we want to know
About money.
what makes a good tax system? Is VAT ideal? What about income tax? All right. But let's finish our discussion on the role of the government, and then we will delve much deeper into the whole issue of taxation. Right. So the final role of the government is regulation, regulation of business practices. Government regulates and controls private enterprise in many ways in order to ensure that businesses serve the best interests of the people as a whole. So government does things like restrict harmful drugs, require standards of quality in food, environmental regulation, regulation over the financial sector. In other industries, government sets guidelines to ensure fair competition without necessarily imposing direct control over those industries. And finally, trade policy. Government is responsible for negotiating a collection of rules and regulations which pertain to trade between itself and other countries. Every country has some form of trade policy in place, and public officials formulating the policies which they think most appropriate for their country. Right, so those are the roles of the government. Let's go up to provide goods and services, redistribute income, impose taxes, regulation of business practices, and implement trade policies. But what we want to focus our attention on, at least for the rest of this class, is taxation. And in particular, we want to look at what we think our best estimate, our best guess, our best policy development, what we think would make a good tax system. If you had to create a tax system and zero taxes is not an option, because you as a government or a policymaker, you need the money for the things that we just talked about what government needs to do. So it has to be a tax system, but what is considered a good tax system? All right. So taxes and tax policies are by far the most controversial of government functions. Therefore, a discussion of what may constitute a good tax system is well worth pursuing. For most economists, and for us as budding economists, we like to agree that there are three essential criteria if we're going to consider a tax system a good tax system. See if you agree with me. It should be fair. I don't know what we mean by fair, but whatever it is, it should be fair. All right? We can argue exactly how we're going to do that, but it should be fair. All right? We don't want to feel like somehow the tax system is putting a bigger burden on us than on somebody else. Secondly, it can't be so complicated that you need a PhD, an MBA, and a CPA. All right? It should be easy to understand. Should be fair, whatever we have figured out to be, and it should be easy to understand. And finally, right, it should not change our decision-making process. Right? It should not distort otherwise efficient markets. Right? I shouldn't have to choose product A over product B because of the taxes imposed on those products. Right? So, see if you agree with me. It should be fair. We should be able to understand it without having to spend years and years in school. And it shouldn't interfere with our decision-making process. Sorry? All right, so let's look at each of these in turn. And we'll start with the fairness. All right. Now, we've come up with a couple examples. Yeah, we can discuss these and argue and see if in fact you agree. Right. The first approach to fairness, we're going to call it the benefit tax approach. And hear me out. This approach suggests that an individual's tax liability should depend on the level of benefits you get from the government. The more you benefit from the government, the more you should pay in taxes. Okay. Think about, let's say, instead of, we pay tax on gas. Right? I don't know if you know this, but we pay quite a hefty tax on every gallon of gas that we purchase. The problem is that that tax goes straight into the consolidated fund, the big kitty, the big pool of money. And then government spends that money however it spends the money. But what if we had a separate pool, and when they tax us for gas, that money goes into the gas pool? And that money in that pool is only used for road traffic type stuff, road improvement, traffic management. We even pay only road traffic police. Right? Does that make sense? Does that sound like?
It does. It does.
Okay, let me go one step further. All right, and think about this. All right, the more gas you buy, the more you benefit, right? Because the only reason you buy more gas because you're using the road more.
Right.
So you're benefiting. For somebody who is riding a bicycle, they don't pay no gas tax, but they're not using the road, presumably. So think about that. We're saying for this kind of tax, it seems fair because the people who benefit the most pay the most. Bus drivers and bus companies would pay more taxes than single family vehicles. Taxi drivers who use the road more would pay, because they buy more gas, they'd pay more in the taxes. People who benefit more pay more. Fair?
Yes, I think so.
That's one possibility. We make up our minds to that. The other possibility is what we call horizontal equity. Horizontal equity says that people in similar circumstances should pay similar taxes. Everybody who live in Nassau East pay the same tax. Everybody live in Life Key pay the same tax. Everybody live in Bay and Town pay the same tax. Horizontal equity. All doctors pay the same tax. All lawyers pay the same tax. All school teachers pay the same tax. Fair?
No,
Why not?
because you have some people that live in the east and work Albany.
Yeah, uh-huh.
So they on the road way more than
No,
the
no, no, no.
person.
We're talking about the
Oh,
first one,
that's
the
some.
benefit tax person. Now, we're
Oh,
talking
my
about
bad. Sorry.
everybody in the same circumstances
Oh,
pay the
okay.
same
Sorry.
tax.
Sorry. Go ahead. Okay. My
So in
bad.
that case, everybody live in Albany pay the same tax.
Yeah, I agree with that then.
Right.
I agree.
Now, of course, there is the argument that all lawyers aren't equal. You know, some lawyers struggling and some lawyers, corporate lawyers, making money hand over fist. Possible. But the counter to that is that all of them got the same law degree. All of them had the same opportunity to go into, to make all kinds of money in the law. Now, if some people chose criminal law that don't pay much, and some people chose corporate law, well, you know, that's their choice. But at least you could begin to, you can begin to see some justification for some people saying everybody who in the same circumstance should pay the same tax. The other possibility is what's called vertical equity. Vertical equity says that people with higher incomes should pay higher taxes.
Let's preach on it. Preach, Mr. Demerit, preach.
Okay, so you are leaning towards vertical equity as being most fair.
Yeah, I think it is. If you make more, you should contribute more because you got more to get.
Maybe, but
And
wouldn't you also have necessary higher expenses? People who make more usually have bigger mortgages.
but you probably benefiting more too.
Yeah, because you know the loopholes to get through all of those.
You probably
paying taxes.
you're in the right circle where you're gonna be able to get breaks.
Okay, all right. But at least we're in a position where we could begin to argue different options for what we think is fair in our tax system. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's possible, the benefit tax approach we could look at, it's possible we could say people in similar circumstances should be pay similar taxes. And it's possible we could say people who make more money should pay more. All of those are possible. There may be some exceptions and people may argue one way or the other, but as a concept, it makes sense in terms of fairness. All right, we're trying to impose some degree of fairness on this tax system that we're trying to create. What about simplicity? All right, we want, even if you never finish high school, all right, even if you came out in grade 6, we wanted to, there's no reason why you should not be so confused with the tax system. So we say a good tax system should be as simple as possible. The simpler it is, the easier it is for everyone to understand, the easier it is for the tax authority to administer it, and the harder it is for people to duck the tax system. So here's my question to you. Is VAT a simple tax? What's the tax rate? What's the VAT rate?
12%
On
goods that are basically
On everything.
That are on everything consumed.
Right. In fact, they have to write exceptions to what the VAT is not applied to, right? It's not applied to, I don't know, whatever that consumption basket is.
And helicopters as well.
It doesn't apply to helicopters?
No, helicopters are VAT free people. So if you really want to get around, you should get a helicopter.
Wait, you serious?
Yeah, I'm serious. From the last time I heard about
How
that,
you know?
what they were saying is that
Now, did you hear about
This was
notice to actually
okay.
see
Okay,
this
let me
in
put
written
it. Let me put it like
someplace?
this. This was discussed on the House floor, not this past year. I think it was last year. One of the things that were VAT exempted, and it was brought up in the House. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure I could be corrected, but I do remember saying that helicopters are VAT free.
Was it just overlooked, or this was a specific exemption that was built into the system?
I think that was something that they put in. I think they may have been in the debate stage, but that was one of the things they were looking at, saying VAT free.
All right. But you would agree that, there's nothing complicated about that. You may not like it, but it's 12% full stop, end of story. Suck your teeth and move on. What about a sales tax? Is that simple?
Yeah, I think so.
You go anywhere in South Florida, it's 7%, 7.5%.
6.
Full
Yeah,
stop.
6.
Right. Is income tax simple?
Complex.
Enormously so. All right. Flat tax. A flat tax, in case you didn't know, is an income tax, but it's say 5% full stop, all your income, no exemptions.
That's probably the simplest, because you know exactly from jump. You ain't trying to figure out, well, this breadbasket item, is this VAT free, or whatever the case is, 5% across the board. You know that's what it is.
So you want a tax that is simple. It's very hard to avoid paying the VAT because it's imposed directly at the cash register. Right? There's no getting around it. Right? Similarly for sales tax. Income tax, enormously complicated. Right? So on the one hand, we want our tax system to be fair. However, we figure out what fair means. And we have 3 ideas in terms of fairness. We can incorporate any of those or a combination. We know it has to be simple, easy to understand, hard to avoid. Right? That way, we know that nobody's gaming the system. And finally, we said for a good tax system, it should be non-distortionary. Right? A good tax system should distort consumer or firms' choices as little as possible. To do this, it should be spread over many goods rather than just a few. And that way it causes less market distortions. A general sales tax will do that. A value-added tax will do that. It does not affect consumer choices. So for example, let's say we're talking about dish detergent. Right. There is, I don't know what kind of dish detergent, Joy, that's the only one I actually know. Gain, no, that's close. Ajax, no, that's the powder stuff.
They do have a Gain dish liquid.
They have Gain dish,
Wow.
okay, fine.
Yeah.
So I get Joy and Gain. And if I prefer Joy, it should not be a different tax on Joy compared to Gain and forces me to pick one over the other. Even though I prefer Joy, they're taxing Joy heavily and I am forced to pick Gain. Right. A good tax system should not make me choose between 2 different brands. All right. However, there is a type of tax system that does distort choices. And this is what is called sin taxes. Right? Sin taxes are usually imposed on goods that a government or society is trying to reduce the consumption of those goods. Alcohol is a good example. Cigarettes, pornography, there are places in the world where, prostitution is legal. I could think Las Vegas and I could think Denmark, and those industries are taxed very heavily. Right. But the idea is that I'm trying to reduce consumption of these goods and services. Right. And these are generally considered sin taxes. So, good tax system, I think, should be fair. and we can argue about our three approaches to fairness. It should be simple, and it should not distort our choices between which brands that we want to purchase. That's what we talk about when we talk about a good tax system. So, questions before we wrap it up? All right, okay. Good. So I do encourage you to go back and read through what we covered today. Look again at some of the practice homework questions. I'll hand out the homework on Wednesday, unless I send it to you tomorrow, but in any case, it'll be before Wednesday's class, and you will return it to me next week, Monday, or the same time next week. If you want to read ahead, we're going to start the first big issue, demand, supply, and market equilibrium. That's going to probably take us a while, at least a whole week, maybe 2 weeks to get through this. All right. But if you want to begin reading ahead, certainly I would encourage you to do so. All right. Any questions before we call it a night? All right. Then you all have my email addresses, and you have my my cell number if you want to send me a WhatsApp or send me an email. All right. If not, then thank you all very, very much, and I will see you guys on Wednesday at 6. Have a good evening.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.